This lecture recital is on the music that Liliuokalani, the last monarch of Hawaii, composed while she was imprisoned at Kilioulani Palace from January to September of 1895. Liliuokalani was born in Honolulu on September 2nd, 1838. She was named Lili'u, and shortly after her birth was given to another couple of the same noble rank, Abnapaki and Lord Konia, in an act of hanai or adoption. In Hawaiian society, hanai was practiced to further strengthen the ties between families of the nobility by fostering mutual familial interests between them. Liliuokalani's brother, David Kalakaua, ascended to the throne in 1874 upon the death of Kamehameha V. In April of 1877, Kalakaua named Lili'u as successor to his throne. It was at this time that she was given the name Liliuokalani. Later that year, American resident aliens, in their hope for annexation of the islands to the United States, forced Kalakaua to sign what has since become known as the Bayonet Constitution. This constitution, which Kalakaua signed at gunpoint, prevented the majority of Native Hawaiians, as well as the burgeoning population of Asian immigrants in Hawaii, from voting. Kalakaua died in San Francisco on January 20th, 1891. Upon his death, Liliuokalani was compelled to take her oath of office to the much reviled Bayonet Constitution. As queen, Liliuokalani attempted to put forth a new constitution, restoring the powers of the monarchy and the voting rights of Native Hawaiians. Considered a threat to Hawaiian business interests, Liliuokalani was deposed in a coup d'etat in January of 1893. She was overthrown by a coalition of annexationist American and European businessmen, along with Native Hawaiian opportunists aided by the United States Navy. These businessmen and opportunists hastily formed a provisional government, and Judge Santo Dole was appointed as president. This government's intention was to engage in political maneuvering to bring about the annexation of the Hawaiian Islands to the United States. In early January of 1895, pro-monarchy revolutionaries staged a revolt in an attempt to restore Liliuokalani to the throne. The insurgency was quashed within a week's time, with 355 Hawaiians and royalists arrested. On the morning of January 16, 1895, Liliuokalani was placed under arrest and interned in a second-floor apartment at Kilioulani Palace. On her fourth day in captivity, Liliuokalani was asked whether she was prepared to die in the event that her captors decide that the principal parties of the revolt pay for it with their lives. Liliuokalani replied yes. In response, it was relayed to her that she and 6 other revolutionaries had been selected to be shot for treason. On January 24, 1895, in prison and under considerable duress, Liliuokalani signed a letter abdicating the throne with the understanding that her jailed supporters would be immediately released. The provisional government reneged on that agreement, releasing her supporters only incrementally over the next 2 years. The threat of death by firing squad was rescinded when word came from the United States that the execution of the captive rebels would militate against annexation. Liliuokalani was tried for treason. She was found guilty and was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. Although the queen was allowed to receive packages and gifts during her imprisonment, all parcels destined for apartment were searched for contraband, and everything that exited the apartment was similarly searched and or censored. The intent of the provisional government was to isolate the queen and to deny her access to the news of the day. Newspapers were banned, and with the exception of her jailers and attendants, no visitors were allowed. The queen composed 7 songs during her incarceration. Inoa, Wehi, Kalanianaole, Paoakalani, and Kilioulani were written in March and possibly April of 1895. The hymns, Aloha, also known as Liliuokalani's Prayer or the Queen's Prayer, Leha Maka, and Haiole were composed in June of 1895. The unfinished Himeni Ho'ole ad Navidad is undated. Only the Queen's Prayer and Paoakalani were passed from the prison apartment to the outside world for publication in sheet music form. Portions of Inoa, Wehi, Kalanianaole were printed in the pro-monarchist Hawaiian language newspaper Maka in April of 1895. Kalanianaole is a mele Inoa, or a name song. Mele are songs or poems. This song is written for Liliuokalani's nephew, Jonah Kalanianaole. There are only 6 known installments of this mele Inoa. The first 4 installments were published anonymously in the pro-monarchist weekly newspaper, Kamakainana, which translates to the Commoner, in April of 1895. At the time of its publication, Kalanianaole was incarcerated at Oahu prison along with other Hawaiian counter-revolutionaries. The Queen's unpublished 1897 songbook, He Buke Mele Hawaii, contains revised versions of the 3rd and 4th installments from Kamakainana, along with 2 additional installments of this mele Inoa. It is not known exactly how the first 4 installments of this mele were conveyed to the newspaper. It is possible that they were written on pieces of paper, then passed to a supporter, who in turn delivered them to the newspaper. It has also been said that the Queen whispered the installments through the door of the palace apartment to a supporter in the hall. This scenario is unlikely, as there was a guard stationed outside the Queen's apartment for the duration of her incarceration. Regardless of the method of conveyance, the mele were brought to F.J. Testa, the editor of Kamakainana, who had himself been released from prison only 2 weeks prior to the publication of the first installment. It is unknown as to why the last 2 installments were never published in the newspaper. Although the first 2 mele were not set to music, they contain a couple of elements worthy of discussion. Before I get into the songs, I should say that unless otherwise indicated, all translations for this thesis were done by Dr. M. Puake Novomeyer, Graduate Chair of the Hawaiian Language Department at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. This mele is subtitled My Waikinikona a Iolani Hale, or From Washington Palace to Iolani Palace. This installment documents the arrival of the provisional government officers at the Queen's home, Washington Place, on January 16th of 1895. This song is composed in a genre called hula kui. Hula kui combine aspects of ancient Hawaiian hula songs with European-styled melodies. These songs are usually accompanied by stringed instruments such as the ukulele and the guitar. Hula kui are strophic songs used to accompany the hula dance. As is common in traditional Hawaiian chants, this hula kui historicizes the Queen's arrest and transportation to her prison quarters at Iolani Palace. The first 4 lines describe the scenes at the Queen's home as Evelyn Wilson, the Queen's attendant, notified her of the approach of the provisional government's forces to her front door. In the 7th and 8th lines, a reference is made to someone named Waipa. Robert Waipa Parker was the captain of the provisional government's forces. It was Parker who arrested Liliuokalani and later testified against her during the trial. Here the Queen calls Parker by his Hawaiian name, Waipa, as if she is reminding him of his Hawaiian heritage. Robert Waipa Parker would spend the rest of his days justifying his role in the arrest of the Queen to his friends, neighbors, and fellow Hawaiians. The next line reads, Kapena Makai Oka PG, or police captain of the PG. The Queen's spelling of PG as P-I-G-I is significant. Throughout her diaries and correspondences, the provisional government is referred to either as the provisional government or abbreviated as P.G. Here, her precise notation indicates that the pronunciation of those initials would be with a hard G or a voiced palatal stop. The word would sound as P.D. or piggy. The Queen's stark appraisal of her adversaries is corroborated in later writings. In recounting her 1897 train trip from Los Angeles to New Orleans, she writes of the vast territories, the thousands of uncultivated acres of the American Southwest belonging to the United States, and the potential there for successful colonies as well as sugar, rice, and coffee plantations. And yet, this great and powerful nation must go across 2,000 miles of sea and take from the poor Hawaiians their little spots in the broad Pacific, must covet our island of Hawaii and extinguish the nationality of my poor people, many of whom have now not a foot of land which can be called their own. The second installment of Inoa Kalaniana'ole is subtitled Lokahi Kamanao Me, or Thoughts Are in Unity with My People. In the third line of this melody, we see a reference to a person named Waitina. Waitina is William Austin Whiting, the Queen's former Attorney General who presided over the Queen's trial. In the next section, there's a reference to a man named Willie Kinney. William Ansel Kinney served as judge advocate and prosecuted the Queen at her trial. Here, the Queen derisively refers to him as Willie Kinney, the hot-tempered Haiole of Waialae. We see more of the Queen's disdain for Kinney in her book, Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen. In the book, the Queen refers to Kinney as, quote, this so-called judge who has been called to pass sentence upon me, end quote. Next, we see the following lines. His act has been to fool the people. Tell all so that you may live. And later, do say that life is in the hands of the royal one who has given her life for the people that you may live, O patriots. Here, the Queen tells her supporters of the provisional government's threat of execution by firing squad and her decision that she would rather sacrifice her life than to divulge the names of the leaders of the Hawaiian resistance movement. Umia ki Aloha hapa Iloko, or let the love inside be held back, is the first of the mele Inoa that appears in the Queen's songbook, He Bukimele Hawaii, and it is the first of the mele Inoa that we will perform today. There are minor editorial discrepancies between what appears in Kalaniana'ole and He Bukimele Hawaii. The lecture and performances at today's recital will focus on the versions of the songs that have been set to music in He Bukimele Hawaii. In this piece, Liliuokalani lends moral support to her nephew Jonah Kalanianaole, who is incarcerated at Oahu prison. In the second line, Kawa refers to a fish pond near the prison. The Queen's reference to Kawa is not to the fish pond itself, but to the jail. In lines 8 and 9, we see the names Keawe and Kalaniana'ole, two of Liliuokalani's and Kalaniana'ole's ancestors. Keawe and Kalaniana'ole were chiefs that helped Kamehameha I in his quest for hegemony over the islands. So the Queen is attempting to bolster Kalaniana'ole's morale by invoking their names to remind him of his noble ancestral legacy. In the next part of the song, the Queen implores her nephew to adorn himself in a lei of Aloha Aina, or love for his homeland. In the line, Ikahiko mau no eka lehua, as an eternal adornment to you, for you, O lehua, we see the word lehua, which normally refers to the lehua flower blossom. The context that the word is used in this line changes its meaning to warrior, specifically the person who is leading the troops charged into battle. The line, Yapaya kaulana hoi hoi ole, or those famed and unwanted walls, refers to the walls of Oahu prison. The next installment is subtitled Kalakalaihi, kahi, hapa, Haiole. Oppressive indeed is the unspoken portion. This is the first of the two installments of this mele Inoa in He Bukimele Hawaii, and it is the second one that we will perform today. This installment was never published in Kalakalaihi. This installment begins with a brief comment from the Queen. Oppressive indeed is the unspoken portion, adorned by a mantle of power. In the next section, the Queen speaks in the voice of her captors as they compel her to acknowledge that you were wrong, and the provisional government has more power than your people, and that they have the power of life and death over Liliuokalani and her supporters. The melody that the Queen has composed for this installment runs contrary to the solemnity of the words of the text of the piece. The melody creeps forward in a stepwise motion as 8 and 16th notes, and then leaps up an interval with 6 or 2 quarter notes. It bestows a satirical feel to the song and plays out as a caustic ridiculing of the Queen's adversaries. Liliuokalani had a partially completed comic opera called Mohilani, which she wrote under the assumed name of Madame Aurelia. The Queen's work with Mohilani provided her with the opportunity to compose in the Western European classical manner for comedic effect. Not only was the Queen not averse to composing in the comedic vein, but she had the experience to do so effectively. In the last part of the melody, the Queen reverts back to her own voice. Here she revels in the victory of life for her and her people in the wake of the United States intervention on their behalf, annulling their sentence to death by firing squad. The final installment of the Liliuokalani for Kalanianaole is subtitled Unrecorded. Silent and calm is the opening of dawn. In this melody, the queen expresses her annoyance at something. The cannons that the queen speaks of here are likely the brass guns on the lawn at Kilioulani Palace, the Hawaiians had named Opakahelu and Aloha. In the line, in the second part of the melee, turn to the uplands, Aweihehene. The term Aweihehene indicates that the queen is mocking someone. There's a typographical error in the Hawaiian part of the next line. Keono should read Keone, which is the Hawaiian language equivalent for the name John. The line, offices of Keone Ho'ana are always working, point to some sort of an office as a source of her annoyance. The word Ho'ana could mean grindstone, and it could also mean to brandish or threaten. While the queen could be referencing sound from a neighboring office or the palace, the name Keone Ho'ana indicates that the queen might be referring to someone as Johnny Blowhard. With the onomatopoeia of the lines, oo, teke, oo, teke, teke, oo, teke, teke, oo, teke, oo, teke, oo, the queen imitates the constant sounding of machines. While she could be referencing anything from the sound of guns going off in the distance to the footsteps of the guard outside her door, the onomatopoeia, along with Keone Ho'ana, the Keone Ho'ana reference, suggested the source of the queen's aggravation is likely the typewriters of the pro-annexation press. The Hibuke Mele Hawaii transcript of Inoa Kalanianaole is dated March 3rd, 1895. The date implies that the whole of the Mele Inoa for Kalanianaole was composed in and around that date. The accuracy of this date is difficult to substantiate as there exist no holographic manuscripts of these Mele Inoa. Since the first 4 of these Mele Inoa were published during the month of April, it is conceivable that the queen wrote the songs in early March, then kept the text in her prison apartment for over a month, waiting for F.J. Testa's release from Oahu prison. We will now perform for you 2 of the installments of Inoa Wehi no Kalanianaole from Hibuke Mele Hawaii. Umia Aloha, Iloko, or Let the Love Inside Be Held Back, and Kalakalaihi, kahi, hapa, Haiole. Oppressive indeed is the unspoken portion. It's old and cantankerous. one of the major Hawaiian song forms in the 19th century is Mele Hawaii. Mele Hawaii are popular songs that consist of modest, straightforward melodies and harmonies, easily adaptable to the ukulele or the guitar, and are largely secular in nature. They are often fitted with sentimental lyrics and are performed in an easy, languorous manner. The songs that Liliuokalani composed during her imprisonment were written with pencils on blank sheets of paper, some of which were embossed with the Queen's royal seal. She used a straight edge to meticulously draw her manuscript lines across the page. The Queen had no musical instruments during the first part of the imprisonment. Several of the songs covered in this thesis were consequently composed or written out by ear. As time passed, she was permitted access to her auto harp and her guitar. In March of 1895, the Queen composed two mele Hawaii, Kilioulani and Paoakalani. These mele, along with Te Inoa Wehi no Kalanianaole, and her handwritten copy of Aloha, have musical notations that indicate melody only. Interpretation and chord progressions are left at the discretion of the performer. The Queen's holographic manuscript for Kilioulani is dated March 22, 1895. She does not include a translation for the second verse of the song. The likeliest interpretation of this song is that the Queen composed it with her attendant, Evelyn Wilson, in mind. Evelyn Wilson was the Queen's childhood friend who volunteered to stay with her in her prison apartment. Her full name is Evelyn Melita Kilioulani Paoakalani Wilson. Kilioulani was her Hawaiian given name. The song begins with a curious reference to the Wiliau flower, Kilioulani ikapua Wiliau. According to translator Paoakalani, there is no plant or flower named Wiliau. He translates Wiliau as the swirling eddy blossom. According to Paoakalani, the use of the word Wiliau implies two lives entwined in the tangled currents of difficulty, resulting from a rushed outcome. It could refer to someone having fallen deeply into the swirling currents of aloha, love or affection, or mahalo, gratitude or respect or admiration for that person. The reference could also be an allusion to a hapa or a multi-heritage person or child. It is a way of saying a child of entwined currents. In the second verse, the Queen proclaims her solemn affection for her multitudes in the highland forest. This is followed by a reference to flocks of birds at kahi. Kahi is a place in Hawaiian chants where birds are snared with fine nets. This verse is probably a reference to the Queen's supporters who customarily met at a garden in the hillside above Honolulu. It can also be a reference to those at Oahu prison already snared in the nets of the provisional government. In the third verse, the Queen writes of ka wahine hele la. The Queen translates the phrase as wanderer or to lead, but Paoakalani translates the same phrase to the day-wending woman, or the woman of the twilight. A woman who travels by the day and runs like the night, like the fading sun. This would be a reference to Kaiona, the Hawaiian goddess of the lost. Kaiona would take care of those who had lost their way and who asked her for guidance. This goddess is also known as Lili'uokalani, the woman of the twilight. This song seems to suggest that in the midst of the tension and confusion of times, which is denoted by the mist in the second verse, that there seems to be someone who draws people to them. A solemn affection comes over me. It is possible that Wahine Helela, or the goddess Kaiona, is a reference to the Queen herself, trying to guide her nation to safety. But the likeliest interpretation of this song, though, is that Wahine Helela would be a reference to Evelyn Kilioulani Wilson, and that Evelyn Wilson is the person who guides the Queen, who would then be the lonely traveler, through the turmoil of her overthrow and imprisonment. The holographic manuscript for Paoakalani is dated March 22, 1895. The song is written partly in English and is dedicated to a young man named John Wilson. John Wilson was the son of Evelyn Wilson and her husband, Charles Wilson, who served as marshal for the provisional government. During the Queen's imprisonment, John Wilson delivered cut flowers from her gardens to the guard gate at Iolani Palace for delivery to reporters on a regular basis. The flower boxes would be searched for contraband before delivery to the Queen's apartment, where she and Evelyn Wilson would spend the day arranging the flowers. As the days and weeks passed, the provisional government began to suspect that the Queen was receiving information on current events from outside her prison apartment. She seemed to have knowledge of the political climate not only in Hawaii, but in the United States as well. The government instigated efforts to trace the source of the leak, but at least in the first few weeks, to no avail. What the provisional government did not know was that the flowers that John Wilson delivered to the palace and left at the guard gate for the Queen were wrapped in pages of newspapers selected by the Queen's supporters so that she would be kept up to date with the political events of the day. Hidden in and amongst the newspapers were clippings and notes expressing love and encouragement from her supporters. Upon its emergence from the Queen's prison apartment, Paoakalani had to gain the approval of the provisional government censors. It was examined for potential subversive messages before its release into the public hemisphere. The opening lines placed the composer in a fixed setting. For the Queen, that setting was a locked apartment in Iloko Palace. She is unable to visit her favorite flower gardens and must wait for the breeze to turn to enjoy the scent of her favorite flower. The line of the chorus, "I've often seen those beauteous flowers that grew at Aloha," is significant because at the time the song was written, the garden at Aloha, which was just short of 2 miles north of where she was imprisoned, was a gathering place for Native Hawaiians sympathetic to the Queen. The second and third verses pose a challenge to the listener. Riddles are common compositional devices in traditional Hawaiian music. This riddle challenges the listener to name the person or the flower that the Queen describes. At the beginning of the third verse, the use of the term of endearment, Aloha, suggests that the Queen is referring to a person whom she describes as she would a flower. This endearment, Aloha, is insufficiently specific for us to know whether the Queen is definitely referring to a person or to a flower. The answer to this riddle is an enigma that continues to elude the scholars of the discipline to this day. To fully appreciate the reference in the chorus to the garden at Aloha, it is essential to understand the circumstances under which they were created. In September of 1894, 3 months before the Hawaiian counter-revolution, the Queen, recognizing the need to quell rising anxiety in the Native Hawaiian population, announced that she would set aside some of her lands along the northern slope of Haiole crater for the cultivation of pua, or flowers. The Queen named the garden Aloha. Here, various flowers, shrubs, and trees were planted by the Queen's supporters throughout the garden. Each plant symbolized their love for the Queen and allegiance to the monarchy. The name Aloha is noteworthy because there is kaona, or hidden meaning, to the name. That meaning is, as the plants grow out of the dark earth into the light, so shall light come to the nation. Thus, the name Aloha can be viewed as a metaphor that suggests that it is a place for the cultivation of a resistance movement. The Hawaiian word for flower is pua. The word by itself means flower or child or something that emerges. Depending on its context, it can also be a reference to people. If we consider the political climate of the times, when the Queen writes of the beauty of the flowers at Aloha, she could be making a reference to the beauty of the people who gathered at that garden. In this manner, the use of the word pua could be an indirect reference to those who gathered at Aloha as patriots. Thus, their reference to cultivating pua could mean to convey or encourage the nurturing of budding nationalism, a flowering resistance movement born of affection for the land, the Hawaiian nation, and its deposed Queen. Ever since it was composed and passed to the world outside the Queen's prison apartment, Paoakalani has been regarded as a beautiful song about the Queen's favorite flower garden. An examination of this song that takes into account the circumstances under which it was composed affords us a deeper appreciation of the song. Paoakalani can be interpreted as an acknowledgement from the Queen of the receipt of the newspaper clippings sent in by her supporters, and or a thank you to the patriots at Aloha for their help and unwavering support. now perform the two Mele Hawaii songs composed in prison, Kilioulani and Pu'upua I Paoakalani. relied heavily upon the verses found in her Book of Common Prayer for inspiration, as well as textual content for the final 4 songs composed during her imprisonment. These songs were composed in the himeni style. Himeni, or hymns, are sacred songs that combine the musical structures of Protestant hymnody or European and American parlor songs with Hawaiian texts. The himeni that the Queen composed in prison were written for a choir. E Ku'uho'ola, or My Savior, was composed in June of 1895. The text of this song was written by Liliuokalani. In this song, the Queen identifies herself as a righteous soul, the faultless one, and describes her adversaries, those who would call themselves the missionary party, as evildoers. The song concludes as the Queen gives thanks to God for her salvation and with an inherent promise that she will, in exchange, see to it that His desires will come to pass, so your will be done. Maka, or I Lift My Eyes, is one of 2 songs composed during the imprisonment that utilize the text from her Book of Common Prayer. The text for this song is from Psalm 121. That's on the bottom of the left-hand page. The holographic manuscript for this song is dated June 5th, 1895. It was in June of 1895 that the Queen began to hear rumors of her impending release to house arrest at her home, Washington Place. The songs composed during this period reflect the Queen's joy and relief at hearing these rumors and learning of the piecemeal release of her counter-revolutionary brethren from prison. In this song, she gives thanks to God for His protection during her time of need. The text for the Himeni Ho'ole Adavida is from Psalm 124, David's Hymn of Praise. This is an unfinished work. You see she's made an X next to that song. As you can see, the Queen has outlined her basic chord progressions with whole notes, half notes, and a few passing quarter notes. The holographic manuscript is undated. In this song, the Queen rejoices in the righteousness of her cause. In the last half of the song, we see the line, "Our soul is escaped even as a bird." This line implies, as in Leha Maka, that the Queen might have heard rumors of her impending release from prison. The reference to snared birds is, of course, similar to the one she employs in Kilioulani. The Aloha o Haku translates to Lord's mercy. This song is also known as Liliuokalani's prayer and is most commonly known today as the Queen's Prayer. The Queen's holographic manuscript is dated June 4th, 1895. This is the only one of the 4 himeni composed during the imprisonment to be released for sheet music publication. The Aloha o Haku is dedicated to the Queen's niece, Princess Kilioulani, who was the heir apparent to Liliuokalani's throne. Here, in the 2nd verse, with the words, "I live in sorrow, imprisoned," we see the only explicit reference to the Queen's imprisonment in her published works from this period. In this song, Liliuokalani expresses the hope that both she and Kilioulani will have the strength to forgive their adversaries for having denied them their royal birthright. The song espouses the religious ideals and tenets of the Euro-American settler colonials, ideals and tenets that the Queen had in the course of her life wholeheartedly internalized. Ironically, it was the very agents of this culture that overthrew her rule, brought about the imprisonment and suffering delineated in this song, and effectuated the appropriation of the islands into the dominant sphere of the United States. The Queen's Prayer is one of Liliuokalani's most popular pieces. It has been performed and recorded by church choirs as well as a multitude of popular artists around the world. In Hawaii, it is often used in the benediction portion of church services. The song is roundly recognized as one of religious devotion and forgiveness. Yet, according to the Queen's Hanai daughter, Lili'uokalani, in the years after it was written, it was condemned by the Queen's enemies as profane, lascivious, and lewd. After her release from prison, Liliuokalani inscribed a curious note along the bottom of one of her typewritten manuscripts of Liliuokalani's prayer. The note reads, "Composed during my imprisonment at Kilioulani Palace, March 22, 1895, by the missionary party who overthrew my government. A quick note on this. This date is probably incorrect. The holographic manuscript that we just saw is dated June 4th, 1895, and that June 4th date is likely to be the correct date. This note, written on the manuscript of a song of piety, virtue, and compassion, is a calling out of the Queen's enemies. In this inscription, Liliuokalani refers to her jailers as members of the missionary party, not the downtown party or the reform party, which were other names under which the missionary party existed. Neither does the Queen simply address them as members of the provisional government. The Queen makes a point of indicating that this party of missionaries overthrew her government, a flagrant act of colonial hegemony that disregarded internationally recognized principles of sovereignty, as well as the nationhood that the Hawaiian Kingdom acquired earlier that century. Throughout her writings, it is not uncommon to see the Queen disparage her Christian adversaries by using the word missionary. In her diary entry dated Sunday, February 5th, 1893, Liliuokalani writes of her disappointment with the political content of the missionary sermons. Do not feel like going to church. Perhaps never more. I never saw a more unchristian-like set as these missionaries, and so uncharitable as to abuse me in the manner they do from the pulpit. Is it godly? No. It makes me feel as if I would not like to do anything more for churches. In her diary entry from February 8, 1893, the Queen writes, went to Paoakalani, came home at 2, drove by the palace and would not look at the American flag over the government building. Time may wear off the feeling of injury by and by, but my dear flag, the Hawaiian flag, that a strange flag should wave over it. May heaven look down on these missionaries and punish them for their deeds. At first glance, the Queen's Prayer is a religious hymn, a song of piety in which the Queen appeals to God for mercy and the strength to act with compassion even towards her most reviled enemies. When viewed in the context of the Queen's writings and the circumstances surrounding its composition, this inscription transforms the song from a hymn of praise and worship to a spiritual song of protest. We will now perform for you 3 hymns composed in prison. Inoa, Leha, Maka, and the Queen's Prayer. 1877 near Wehi on the island of Oahu, when Liliuokalani spied a member of her party bidding farewell to a lover. Some versions of the story report that the scene was of a young man embracing and bidding farewell to his kama'aina, or native Hawaiian lover. Others maintain that the couple was Liliuokalani's sister, Likelike, and a 19-year-old Paoakalani colonel in the royal party named James Boyd. The term Paoakalani indicates a part Caucasian, part Hawaiian person. It is said that Likelike was involved in an extramarital relationship with Colonel Boyd. Liliuokalani set the song to paper the following year in early 1878. The Queen has stated that Aloha was written out in prison so that the manuscript could be sent to Chicago for publication. However, a search through musical score repositories produced no records of it having been published in Chicago after the turn of the century. This manuscript emerged from the Queen's apartment during the early part of her incarceration. Of course, the song was not composed during the Queen's imprisonment, but the emergence of this manuscript from the apartment is likely the reason for the misconception held by some that the song was composed in prison. Although Aloha has always been and still is a love song, there have been unavoidable temptations over the years, likely because of its sentimental nature, to tint the song with the hue of politics. Lili'uokalani, the Queen's daughter, stated that the provisional government was overjoyed upon seeing this manuscript emerge from her mother's cell. The PG's interpretation was that the song was a concession from the Queen, that it was her heartfelt farewell to the monarchy and the Hawaii of old. Liliuokalani was held captive at Kilioulani Palace for a period just short of 8 months. She was released from the palace on September 6, 1895, and spent the remainder of her sentence under house arrest at her home. She was pardoned by Republic of Hawaii President Sanford Dole on October 23, 1896. In 1898, the islands were annexed to the United States against the will of 95% of the native Hawaiian population. Liliuokalani acknowledged that the time of kings and nobles had come and gone, but continued to fight for the sovereignty of the Hawaiian Islands. She continued to write politically infused music and passed away in 1917 at the age of 79. The garden at Uluhaimalama was destroyed after the Queen's death in 1917 to prevent its use as a rallying point for those fighting the annexation of the islands to the United States. The plants and flowers that once signified the hopes and dreams for the blossoming of a resistance movement and the sovereignty of the Hawaiian nation were replaced by corpses as the gardens were turned into a cemetery. The garden at Paoakalani remained a part of the Queen's estate until her death, whereupon they became a part of the Liliuokalani Trust. In 1966, the land was leased to a multinational hospitality corporation, and the garden was plowed under to make way for a Holiday Inn. That Holiday Inn is now a Marriott Hotel. The story of Paoakalani is emblematic of the conflict between cultures that still exists in the islands today. The Hawaiians view themselves as caretakers of the environment. To them, the concept of commodification of natural resources was utterly foreign. They tended to their pona, which is the trueness or purity of the conduit between the human spirit and the environment. One of the Queen's foremost concerns during her lifetime was the potential demise of traditional Hawaiian culture. Throughout her life, she fought against Western commercial interests and sought to ensure the viability of the values of traditional Hawaiian society. Yet in the 1950s, the 1960s, and 1970s, Aloha was put to use as a siren song, beckoning tourists to the islands to fill the coffers of multinational hotel and resort corporations. What we see in the music of Liliuokalani's prison songs reflect the maturity and wisdom of a composer who persevered through the wiliau, the misty, swirling eddies of her life. She saw the gradual domination of her homeland by, at first, the American missionaries, in subsequent decades, their business-minded children and grandchildren, and finally, the American government. We see the people and entities that she relied upon to help her through troubled times. Her friend, Evelyn Kilioulani Wilson, her political supporters, and her religion. Finally, we see in these works a composer intent on solidifying support for her falling government by way of song. Music in this circumstance acts as a mediating force in a time of political crisis. It was the conduit which enabled this jailed composer queen to communicate with her people. These songs also demonstrate the importance of context when divining musical intent. And with the present songs of Liliuokalani, this musical intent is one of resistance and protest. Today, Aloha is often performed in the islands to close concerts and ceremonies. It is regarded almost as an anthem, and it is not unusual to see the audience rise to their feet as the song begins. Curiously, many performances and recordings of Aloha are marked by extremely slow tempos. It is as if the artist's interpretation of the song is in agreement with the provisional government's 1895 assessment of it as a farewell to the Hawaiian nation. We will now conclude the recital with Aloha. We will perform this song not as a farewell to the Hawaii of old, but as the Queen originally intended it, as a love song.